going to be back every week with a fun quilting tip for you. This week, we're going to cover quilt as you go. It's a really great technique to use up all those little scraps that you end up with at the end of a big project. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start with a piece of batting and a whole bunch of fun scraps. I like to organize mine a little bit by smallest to largest. It makes it easy to do our quilt as you go. These quilt as you go panels, they're a really great way to use up to make coasters, tote bags. You could sew a bunch together to create a really fun, crazy quilt as well. You want to make sure your walking foot is on your machine. I have a walking foot integrated within my machine, so that's what I'm using today. And I have some cotton quilting thread in my bobbin as well as on the top of my machine. My first piece I'm going to pick out, I'm going to place right on a piece of batting. There's no backing on this, it's just my piece of fabric and my batting. And I'm going to start by just quilting lines all the way through it to really secure it. You can choose to quilt these lines as close together or as far apart as you want. I like to just follow my walking foot. It makes it a little bit easier. Make sure you clip your threads at the end of every row. Once my first piece is secured, I'm going to pick my next piece that I want to sew right next to it. I'm going to go with this one. I'm going to line them up together. I want this one to end up next to it on the right. So we're going to line it up on that right-hand side and sew it together with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. The great part about this technique is that you don't have to get up to iron every time you put a new piece down. We're going to give it a light finger press. And now we're going to quilt the two together with about 1/8 inch seam allowance apart. So that's going to allow us to really secure this new piece down without having to get up and press every time we want to put a new piece on our quilt as you go. You might notice some of these loose threads from when I've cut my threads. If I was at home, I'd be clipping them every time that I add a new piece, just so I don't end up with tons of loose threads all over my piece of quilt as you go. Now I'm going to quilt this one down in the same way that I did the first one, using my walking foot as my guide. Now it's time to add a third piece. This is where you might want to vary where you put your third piece. You might want it down here, maybe I want it on the left-hand side. It really has a lot of flexibility to be as organic as you want it to be. When you're adding your third piece down, you always want to make sure that it matches the width of the two before it. So as you notice, this one's a little bit too long. I'm just going to take some scissors and simply just trim it. It doesn't have to be perfect, as most of this is going to get hidden in the next seam allowance of the piece that we sew on, but we want to make sure that we're getting it as close as possible. Again, right sides together, and with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, we're going to sew this piece down. Again, finger pressing it and sewing it down. Okay, so I would continue this way until I filled my piece as big as I want, depending on what kind of project that I was doing with it. So this is a really fun way to use up scraps. It's called Quilt As You Go, and you don't even have to get up and press anything. Everything's done at your machine.